Recently I've been getting into the Dead Rising series. I found a copy of Dead Rising 2 for cheap, don't judge me for playing the second game first, and I really liked it. And much later I found the rest of the Dead Rising franchise on sale for cheap, so I bought the rest of the series and have been playing through each and every one of them. For some reason, this series really appealed to me and I eventually decided to review all of them. Most of them. Let's start with the story. The game follows Frank West, a freelance photojournalist who travels to Willamette, Colorado after getting a tip about something strange happening at Willamette. When he arrives, he encounters the undead. Frank's pilot drops him off and leaves him with 72 hours to uncover the truth about the outbreak before he comes back to pick him up, if he survives for that long. When Frank arrives at the mall, he meets Carlito Keyes, who hints at having a connection to the outbreak. Frank goes to the mall's entrance, and after an old woman lets the zombies in to save her dog, Frank runs to the mall's security room and meets Brad, Jesse, and Otis. Brad leaves to continue his investigation, and Frank, believing that he may have the answers he's looking for, follows him. After finding Brad and taking down Carlito, Brad agrees to explain what he's doing if Frank helps him track down Dr. Barnaby, who Frank had photographed earlier. They find Dr. Barnaby in a barricaded bookstore where he refuses to leave without a secure escape route from the mall. Later, Carlito captures Dr. Barnaby and forces Brad and Frank to rescue the doctor, with Brad getting injured and requiring medicine. Frank goes to the supermarket and encounters the crazy manager with a woman Frank saw earlier in his shopping cart. After defeating the manager, Frank attempts to question the woman, but she runs off. After Frank gets the medicine and Barnaby refuses to talk with Frank taking pictures, he decides to track down the woman to get answers. When he finds her, the woman reveals herself as Isabella Keyes, Carlito's sister. Isabella agrees to arrange a meeting with Carlito so Frank can learn the truth behind the outbreak, but when Frank goes to meet her again, she is shown to be wounded from her brother. Frank takes her back to the security room, and Isabella recognizes Dr. Barnaby as the head of an American research laboratory in her hometown, Santa Cabeza. Dr. Barnaby reveals the goal of his research was to mass-produce cattle, but it resulted in the creation of mutated wasps called queens, which created zombies. The queens escaped the laboratory and caused an outbreak which forced the US government to cover up the incident by exterminating the zombies and any witnesses of their livestock research. When the truth is revealed, Isabella reveals Carlito's second plan to set off explosives in the maintenance tunnels beneath the mall to propel immature queen larvae into the stratosphere and across the United States. Frank manages to collect the bombs and bring them out into the open where they explode harmlessly, and Brad confronts Carlito, but Carlito manages to beat him and traps him to let the zombies finish him off. Frank and Isabella head to Carlito's hideout to shut down a jamming device on his laptop, but it requires a password. The security monitors show Carlito being dragged away by a psychotic butcher. Frank saves Carlito, but he dies due to his injuries. Before his death, he passes on a locket to Frank for Isabella, with Frank promising to expose the Santa Cabeza massacre to the world. After learning about her brother's death and Frank giving her the locket, Isabella figures out the password to Carlito's laptop and shuts down the jammer. Jesse calls for help, but they are denied rescue, with the government deciding to deny any knowledge of the Willamette incident, and special forces being sent to exterminate all zombies and witnesses. After hiding out in Carlito's hideout, Isabella decides to stay at the mall and Frank heads for his rendezvous. As his pilot arrives, a stowaway zombie attacks him, causing him to crash into the mall's Central Park. With Frank's ride out of the mall destroyed, he falls to his knees in defeat. And that's the game's ending. For 72-hour mode. In overtime mode, as Frank is about to be killed by zombies, Isabella rescues him, but Frank passes out. When Frank wakes up in Carlito's hideout, Isabella tells him that he has been infected and has 24 hours before he becomes a zombie. Isabella believes that she may be able to create a temporary cure, but needs supplies. So Frank goes looking for the items she needs from the mall. Although while making the cure, they go through Carlito's laptop and find documents about 50 larva-infected children with foster parents across the country, implying another plan to cause outbreaks across the country. With a special pheromone developed by Isabella, the two make their escape from the mall but encounter Brock Mason, the leader of the special forces who happens to have led the cleanup operation in Santa Cabeza. After Frank defeats Brock, we get a final shot of Frank screaming, for some reason. The epilogue text reveals that Frank and Isabella managed to escape Willamette, with Frank reporting on the incident, forcing the US government to admit partial responsibility for the livestock research program, as well as the Santa Cabeza incident. But they blame the Willamette outbreak on terrorists, everyone forgets about the incident, and Carlito's plan is never confirmed nor disproven. For now, anyway. There are also multiple endings, which vary depending on whether or not you complete the case files and where you are when time runs out. The most interesting part of these endings are the aftermaths described by the text, and that's the story of Dead Rising. Overall, while the game's story isn't amazing, it's enough to keep me wanting to see what happens next. Despite having some cliches, it gets the job done and uses discovery well enough to make it enjoyable. The characters are also written well, Carlito has some decent motivations, and Frank himself is a likable character. And I like that he isn't the typical handsome badass action hero that you see in many games. He has a more average build, he's always focused on the situation at hand, and while he cracks an occasional joke every once in a while, he's always pretty serious. Well, with the story covered, time to talk about the graphics. I can definitely see that this game looked great for the time it was released, but nowadays, it's aged. The character models don't look that great, and the textures can be a bit low quality. But the game is far from ugly. I mean, there are plenty of nice details, and the mall itself is visually interesting, with each section of the mall being distinct enough so that it was almost never lost. While the game's visuals have aged, they get the job done. Now for the most important part of a game, the gameplay. Now at first, Dead Rising may seem like a typical zombie game. I mean, it's got the essentials. Guns to shoot zombies, melee weapons such as knives and bats, and large amounts of zombies, but as you go further, you realize that this isn't a typical zombie game, because for one thing, your greatest enemy isn't the zombies, but instead the time limit. Everything you do in the game is under a time limit. Both story and side events happen at certain times and they're only available for a limited amount of time. Failure to complete a story event results in the truth vanishing in the darkness, meaning you can't continue with the main story unless you load a save file or restart, or you can choose to continue playing and explore them all. There's the day and night cycle, which affects the zombies' behavior. In the day, they are slow and sluggish, but at night they're more aggressive and plentiful. There are several side quests that involve saving survivors and killing psychopaths. While they are optional, it's beneficial to complete them since they reward you with prestige points, which is this game's experience points to level Frank up, powerful weapons, and at one point a shortcut that can really help. Getting everything done under the time limit is very difficult, especially on your first try, because when you start off, Frank just isn't well suited for the task. He starts off really slow, isn't very strong, has very few combat techniques, and can't carry many items. And don't expect to find a powerful weapon to breeze through the game, because all weapons will break after a while. Item management is essential, since healing items, weapons, and magazines that give you a boost when equipped all take a slot of your inventory. Also, you can only save at restrooms, and there aren't that many in the mall. You most likely aren't going to beat it on your first try, and I can see why this may be a turnoff for some people. This is a game that requires patience to truly enjoy. However, if you can get through the rough beginning and remember to save, through your patience, you will learn the game's mechanics, and Frank will be stronger because when you die, you can start the game over and take Frank's status over to the new playthrough. By your second or third rebirth, you'll start to understand the game's mechanics and the layout of the mall, and Frank should be strong enough to handle what the mall throws at him. Not to mention, you'll remember to save whenever you can. I can see that starting the game over can be irritating, but thankfully the game itself isn't super long, so don't worry. You won't have to go through 20 hours of replaying the game to get back to where you were, since the total 3-day time limit is only 6 hours. Also, if you have the patience, it can be really satisfying. Yeah, it can be annoying to have to do it all over again, even with higher stats, but I find that it feels good to learn from my mistakes and come back better than ever. The once dreaded timer becomes more manageable, and the psychopaths that I had trouble with fall with ease. I learned the layout of the mall and found myself relying on the map less and less, only using it to plan efficient routes. When you start to understand the game, you could start having some real fun. Some may find the game clunky and irritating, but I find it challenging and engaging. The game is filled with constant tension. Aside from the timer, the health meter doesn't give you exact value, so when you're down to 1 square, you won't know if the next hit will kill you. You can't always have the best weapons on you at all times, since they will eventually break, so expect some moments where you just have to make do with what's readily available in the area, and thankfully, you have a lot of options. Aside from the usual guns, knives, and chainsaws, You can pretty much pick up any item in the mall and use it as a weapon. From bowling balls, lead pipes, chairs, gems, potted plants, soda cans, and even water guns. Okay, they aren't all effective, but you should get my point. Even if it isn't effective, it's still an option. It can be pretty fun to just take any random object and use it on zombies. I love this toy Mega Buster. Not very effective, but it's cute. You can also play a bit of dress up. There are plenty of outfits you can find in the mall, and you can make Frank look either ridiculous or cool. I also like how the game manages to balance the humor with a more realistic setting. Frank's willingness to dress up in any outfit, the constant Capcom references, and the over-the-top personalities of the psychopaths are just great. Also, let me take this moment to talk about the psychopaths, which are this game's bosses. They're all pretty memorable and fun to fight. We have the crazy store manager Steven Chapman, the maniacal clown Adam, the war veteran Cliff Hudson, who is the most sympathetic of the psychopaths, and more. While they can become a cakewalk after you power up or decide to use the mini chainsaw, which is probably the most powerful weapon in the game, but their intro cutscene, boss fights, personalities, and boss themes all make them memorable. As much as I love the challenge in this game, there are some things in the game that I am not a fan of. First off, the survivors. To save a survivor, you need to escort them to the safe house in order to gain the PP bonus. Unfortunately, doing so is a real drag. The survivor AI is awful. You'll be babysitting these people a lot. They can't escape from a zombie's grab, so you can't go too far away from them. You could give them a weapon, but in most cases, if you give them a gun, you'll most likely be the one taking the bullets. Taking them to the safe house can be frustrating as they might either run into walls, stop following you, be caught by a zombie, or start unnecessary fights. Also, I don't like how the entrance to the safe house is on higher ground because sometimes these people will just refuse to jump up. Expect to hear yourself screaming in frustration at them. Surprisingly, the survivors that need to be carried are easier to save, since they will be forced to stick with you, although you can't defend yourself or check your watch. It's manageable, but there's no defending this part of the game. It's a shame too, because the survivors themselves are actually pretty memorable. They don't have deep personalities or anything, but the situations you find them in and their dialogue does help to make me want to save them. You'll get your objectives through Otis, who will call you when you're out in the mall, but he can be irritating when you're in the middle of a group of zombies or fighting a psychopath, because when you take a call, you'll have to wait for the text box dialogue to finish, but during the call, you can't attack or pick up items, so you'll probably be running around and hoping that you don't get hit. If the call is interrupted for any reason at any point, you'll have to sit through the entire call again, but also an additional bit of dialogue as he scolds you for being rude, and you can only be directed to the objective when Otis finishes its dialogue. Another flaw is that the controls could use some work. Performing some of the moves can be finicky, and I'm not a fan of the fact that dodging requires a double push of the analog stick. Seriously, am I the only one who kept accidentally dodging? Also, when you aim guns, you'll be locked into place, so you can't dodge attacks. You could try running and gunning, but it's inaccurate. What makes it worse is that Frank can move while aiming his camera, which I don't get. Then again, I guess he did say that he's better with a camera than a gun. Oh yeah, and Frank's a photographer, so you can take pictures. You can earn PP from it, but it's not exactly a necessity, and I really don't find myself taking many pictures, aside from Kent's mission and the occasional photo opportunities which reward higher PP bonuses. When you finish the main campaign, you unlock Infinity Mode, which gives a more arcade-style experience. The goal of Infinity Mode is to survive for as long as possible. Here, all survivors are hostile, you constantly lose health by hunger, food items don't respawn, and you can't save. I can see how this can be fun for some people, but I honestly didn't play much of it. Overall, Dead Rising is a brilliant but flawed game. The gameplay is rewarding and satisfying to master, the story was interesting, and beating zombies with random items can be fun. The game isn't for everyone, I'll admit. It's definitely not for the impatient and can be hard to master. This game is not friendly to newcomers, and there are just some things that I just can't defend, but if you can get through the rough beginnings, you'll find a unique and engaging zombie game. I say give it a try if you want, but if you don't like it, it's understandable. But, as we know, this wasn't a one-shot series, so join me next time when I cover Dead Rising 2, which is where I started to get my fill of Dead Rising.